And the next question indeed comes from Assemblymember Twycross, economic challenges facing London.
Thank you, Chairman. There are many challenges that were not tackled by the last Mayor. In addition to the answer I gave earlier on in my oral update, I'll set out some more this morning. Poverty is much higher in London than the UK. A third of all inner London residents are in poverty, and nearly a quarter in outer London, both higher than any other region. Around 1.2 million of those in poverty live in a working family, up 70% in a decade. 300,000 children in inner London, or 46%, are living in poverty after housing costs. 400,000 children in outer London, or 33%, are in child poverty. The number of children in poverty in London's private rented sector has doubled over the last 10 years to reach over 500,000. Housing has now become the #1 problem for business, not just for the millions of Londoners who cannot afford their own home because of the failure to increase supply. London rents have been hiked by a quarter since 2008, double the rise in the rest of the South East, which saw the next highest rise. Investment has not kept pace with London's growth, with key projects like the Thames Gateway Bridge cancelled, while resources were wasted on projects such as the Thames Estuary Airport, remember that one, new bus for London, and cable car. The number of those paid below the London living wage increased during the last Mayor's 2 terms. Finally, even when progress was made, like on apprenticeships, Mr Johnson missed his own target by around 70,000 apprentices. Mr Johnson simply failed to sort out London's problems of inequality, weak investment and low pay.
Thank you. And I'm pleased you highlighted some of the issues that a number of Assembly members here have highlighted in the past to your predecessor. I'd like to focus a little bit on low pay because, as you're aware and as you made clear, low pay became an increasing problem under Boris Johnson. And we've now got a situation in which real wages have fallen considerably, leaving Londoners worse off, and in which 60% of adults and children living in poverty now come from working households. What specific steps are you planning to make to ensure that Londoners get a fair day's pay for a fair day's work?
Well, firstly, I welcome the government's announcement of a national living wage. The problem is, to Londoners, it's meaningless because the national living wage is less than the London living wage.
Yeah.
And there are too many Londoners not receiving a London living wage. And so we're working with local authorities and others to make sure as many Londoners as possible get a London living wage. We also want to use the supply chain in relation to procurement to encourage the private sector to pay a decent pay for a decent day's work. The good news is the private sector sees the benefits in relation to recruitment and retention of paying a decent pay for a decent day's work. And there are literally hundreds of companies in London already paying the living wage. There are hundreds more who are accredited and paying the living wage. And what we've got to do is make employers recognise the benefits of their business by paying a living wage. I mean, City Hall is useful for the levers I've got, but it's also a pulpit to persuade, to convene, to cajole people to pay Londoners a decent pay for a decent day's work.
Great, I'm really pleased to hear that. And one of the things you've referred to in the past is around your ideas, your manifesto being a movement. And if you think about other movements in the economic area, you've got the fair trade movement, which sort of revolutionised people's ability to actually be able to tell what conditions workers were remunerated, the kind of conditions that people worked in overseas. And one of the things we're lacking in this country still is a sort of consumer movement around knowing around sort of workers' rights, what kind of treatment they get at work, everything from the whether they get to keep their tips through to whether their employers pay the living wage. Will you work with organisations like the Living Wage Foundation and trade unions to ensure that actually consumers know what choices they're making, for example, from everything from when they buy coffee through to hotel rooms in London?
Absolutely. There's a big role for me to play in coordination, but also one of the things we want to do is set up a fairness unit here in City Hall to give that sort of signposting advice, to provide transparency and to help Londoners get a decent pay for a decent day's work.
That's very encouraging. Thank you.